Four rich men refuse to pay the waitress until the Mafia boss shows up behind them. The neon sign buzzing outside the Harbor Line grill had a distinctive hum, a sound that seemed to vibrate directly into Lena Carter's exhausted bones. It was a rainy Tuesday in Briarview, the kind of gray, relentless drizzle that turned the city's soot into a slick paste on the sidewalks. Inside, the diner smelled of stale coffee, frying bacon, and the damp wool of coats drying on hooks near the door. Lena adjusted her apron, wincing as a sharp pain shot up from her heels to her calves. She was 6 hours into a double shift, and her feet felt like they were bruising against the hard linoleum floor. She took a breath, smoothed the stray hairs escaping her messy bun, and forced the corners of her mouth upward. The smile did not reach her eyes, which were shadowed with the kind of fatigue that sleep could not fix. She checked the ticket in her pocket. Table 4 needed ketchup. The guy at the counter wanted a refill, and somewhere in the back of her mind, a calculator was running a ceaseless tally. Rent was due in 3 days. The electric bill was 2 weeks overdue, sitting on her kitchen counter like a threat. And then there was the big one. The frightening, insurmountable number that kept her awake at night. Her mother, Ruth, needed a new round of medication for her heart condition, and the insurance company had sent a letter yesterday politely explaining that this specific brand was no longer covered. Lena grabbed the coffee pot and moved onto the floor. She navigated the narrow aisles between booths with practiced grace, dodging a busboy carrying a tower of dirty plates. She poured coffee for Mr. Henderson, a regular who tipped $2 every single day, regardless of the bill. "How is your mother doing?" "Lena?" "Mr. Henderson asked, blowing on the steam rising from his mug. "She is hanging in there." Lena lied smoothly. Her voice was steady, betraying none of the panic that tightened her chest whenever she thought about Ruth's pale face or the way her mother's breath hitched after walking just a few steps. "She is a fighter. You know that." She moved on before he could ask more questions. She had perfected the art of the polite deflection. She needed this job. She needed the tips. She needed every single dime that came across these Formica tables. She endured the unsolicited advice from older customers and the leering looks from truck drivers because the alternative was losing the apartment. And if she lost the apartment, she had nowhere to put a sick woman who needed warmth and stability. The bell above the door chimed, cutting through the low murmur of conversation and the clatter of silverware. The atmosphere in the diner shifted immediately. It was subtle, but Lena felt it. The air grew heavier, charged with a sudden influx of expensive cologne and loud voices. 4 men walked in. They looked like they had taken a wrong turn on their way to a country club. They wore tailored suits that cost more than Lena made in a year, the fabric distinct and sharp against the worn vinyl of the diner booths. They did not wait to be seated. They strode to the largest booth near the window, laughing loudly at a joke only they could hear. Lena felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. She recognized the type. Briarview was a working-class city, but it had pockets of new money, venture capitalists and developers coming in to buy up old warehouses and turn them into lofts no one from the neighborhood could afford. She took a breath, grabbed 4 menus, and walked over. "Welcome to Harbor Line," she said, keeping her voice bright. "Can I start you gentlemen off with some coffee?" The man closest to her, a blonde with a jawline that looked purchased rather than inherited, didn't even look up from his phone. He waved a hand dismissively. "Give us a minute, sweetheart," he said. "We are talking business here." Lena stood there for a second, feeling the heat rise in her cheeks. She placed the menus on the table gently. "I will give you some time," she said, and turned to walk away. "Nice view." "Though," another one muttered. She stiffened but kept walking. She heard the low ripple of laughter behind her. She went back to the service station and gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. Ignore it, she told herself. Just get the money, get the tip, go home. 10 minutes later, they waved her over. The blond man, whose name she later learned was Bryce Harrow, looked her up and down with an expression that made her feel like livestock being appraised at an auction. "What is good here?" Bryce asked, leaning back and spreading his arms along the top of the booth. "And do not say everything. We can see the decor. We know this is not exactly fine dining." "Our burgers are very popular," Lena said, keeping her eyes fixed on the notepad in her hand. "And the meatloaf is the special today." "Meatloaf," the man across from Bryce snorted. His name was Trent Collins, dark-haired and wearing a watch that glinted under the cheap fluorescent lights. "I think I will pass on the mystery meat." "Do you have anything that was not frozen in 1990? Lena forced a polite laugh. "Everything is made fresh daily, sir." She took their orders. It was complicated. They wanted substitutions that were not on the menu. Chad Mercer wanted his eggs poached, not fried, even though the menu clearly stated no poached eggs during the lunch rush. Oliver Dane wanted a specific brand of sparkling water they definitely did not carry. When Lena explained they only had club soda, Oliver rolled his eyes and sighed as if she had personally insulted his lineage. "Bring me a water with lemon then," Oliver said, "and make sure the lemon is fresh, not that dried-up stuff you keep in a jar. I will check the kitchen for you," Lena said. Throughout the meal, they ran her ragged. Every time she walked past, they needed something else. More napkins, a different fork because this one has a spot, more hot sauce, another side of ranch, and with every interaction, the comments grew bolder. "You have an accent," Bryce said at one point, stopping her as she tried to clear an appetizer plate. "Where is that from? Or is that just how people talk down here in the slums?" Lena pulled the plate away. "I grew up just a few blocks from here, sir." "Cute," Trent said, smirking at his friends. "Authentic. I like it. It adds to the gritty experience." They treated her not like a person, but like a prop in their poverty tourism. They made backhanded compliments about her uniform, asking if it came in a smaller size, laughing when she blushed. Lena swallowed her pride. Over and over again. She thought of the pharmacy counter. She thought of the red overdue stamp on the electricity bill. She thought of Ruth's tired smile. Eventually, the meal ended. The table was a disaster zone of crumpled napkins and half-eaten food. Lena printed the check, tallied the total, and placed it on the table inside the black folder. "Thank you for coming in," she said, already dreading the cleanup. Bryce Harrow picked up the folder. He opened it, looked at the number, and then looked at Lena. A cruel, amused smile played on his lips. "Is this a joke?" Bryce asked loudly. The diner went quiet. Lena froze. "Excuse me, $70, Bryce announced, holding up the receipt. "You expect us to pay $70 for this garbage?" "Sir, you ordered 4 entrees, appetizers, and drinks," Lena said, her voice trembling slightly. "The food was cold," Chad Mercer chimed in, leaning forward. "My eggs were rubbery. And the service," Oliver Dane added, shaking his head. "I have never waited so long for a glass of water in my life. It was abysmal." Lena looked at the empty plates. They had eaten almost everything. "You ate the food," she said, trying to keep her voice level. "You did not complain when I checked on you." "We were starving," Bryce said, tossing the folder back onto the table. "But we are not paying for this. It is the principle of the thing." "We do not believe in tipping either," Trent said, looking around the room as if addressing an audience. "Why should we subsidize your employer's inability to pay a living wage? The restaurant should pay you, not us. So do not expect anything extra even if we did pay the bill, which we are not doing." Panic flared in Lena's chest. If a table walked out on a bill this size, the policy at Harborline was strict. It came out of the server's tips. $70 was nearly everything she had made today. It was the money for the electric bill. "Sir, please," Lena said, stepping closer. "I cannot void the check just because you decided you did not like it after you ate it. If you do not pay, I have to cover it." Bryce shrugged. "Sounds like a you problem, sweetheart. Maybe you should get a better job." Lena looked toward the counter. Her manager, a nervous, sweating man named Carl, was watching from the pass-through window. He saw the suits. He saw the expensive watches. He looked terrified of a confrontation. He gave Lena a sharp look and mouthed the words, "Fix it." He was not going to help her. He was terrified of bad reviews or a scene that would scare away the few customers they had. Lena turned back to the men. "Please, Just pay the bill." "No," Bryce said. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. "In fact, if you keep bothering us for a few dollars, we are going to leave a review that will shut this dump down. I know people at the health department. I can have inspectors here by tomorrow morning." He moved to walk past her. Lena, desperate and acting on instinct, stepped in his path. She was not trying to be aggressive. She just wanted him to stop. "You have to pay," she said. Bryce stopped. His face darkened. The amusement vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine aggression. He reached out and grabbed Lena's wrist. His grip was shocking, hard and painful. His fingers digging into the soft skin of her forearm. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of the onions from the burger he claimed he hated. "Do not touch me," he hissed, "and learn your place. You little waitress. You are nothing. Get out of my way before I make sure you never work in this town again." Lena gasped, trying to pull her arm back, but he held fast. Tears of humiliation and pain pricked at the corners of her eyes. She was trapped. The entire diner was watching, but no one moved. They were all tired, working people. And these men radiated the kind of money that bought lawyers and ruined lives. Suddenly, a voice cut through the tension. It was not loud. It did not shout. It was a low, baritone rumble, calm and terrifyingly steady. "I think the lady asked you to pay your bill." Bryce froze. The other three men, who had been snickering, stopped mid-laugh. Standing behind Bryce was a man who had been sitting at the far end of the counter for the last hour. Lena had barely noticed him. He had been eating a slice of cherry pie, drinking black coffee, and reading a newspaper. He was tall, wearing a dark gray overcoat that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His hair was dark, brushed back, and his face was hard angles and shadows. He did not look like the soft, wealthy men in suits. He looked like something carved out of granite. Bryce released Lena's wrist as if it had suddenly turned red hot. He spun around. "Who do you think you are?" Bryce demanded, trying to regain his bravado. "This is none of your business." The stranger stepped closer. He moved with a predator's grace. Silent and efficient, he looked down at Bryce, his eyes dark and unblinking. "It became my business when you put your hands on her," the man said. Bryce sneered. "Do you know who I am? I am Bryce Harrow." "My father is Marco DeLuca," the man interrupted softly. The name hit the group of men like a physical blow. The color drained from Bryce's face so fast he looked like he might faint. Trent Collins took a stumbling step back, bumping into the table. Oliver Dane looked at the floor. Lena watched, confused. She knew the name DeLuca was associated with the old Italian families in the neighborhood, the ones people whispered about, but she had never seen this man before. Marco DeLuca stood perfectly still. He did not posture. He did not raise his fists. He simply existed in the space, and his presence sucked all the air out of the room. "You are Bryce Harrow," Marco said, his voice a smooth, dangerous purr. "Your father sits on the city council. He lives at 421 Crestview Drive, white colonial, blue shutters." Bryce's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "And you," Marco said, shifting his gaze to Trent. "Trent Collins, you are supposed to be at a conference in Chicago right now. I wonder what your wife, Emily, would say if she knew you were actually here in Briarview, spending money on lunch while she thinks you are working. Or maybe she would be more interested in the texts on your second phone." Trent went pale. "And Chad," Marco continued, looking at the man who had complained about the eggs. "I heard a rumor about an insider trading investigation involving your firm. Something about the impossible timing of those tech stocks last month. It would be a shame if the SEC got an anonymous tip with the specific file numbers." The silence in the diner was absolute. Even the cook in the kitchen had stopped scraping the grill. Marco took one step closer to Bryce. He reached out and adjusted the lapel of Bryce's expensive suit jacket. The motion was gentle, almost affectionate, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "You come into my neighborhood," Marco said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried to every corner of the room. "You eat the food. You treat the people who serve you like dirt, and then you try to steal from a woman working hard for a living." He smoothed the fabric of the lapel. It is bad for your health. Bryce. Very bad. Bryce was trembling, visible. Violent tremors shook his hands. We were just leaving. Bryce stammered. We were just joking. It was a misunderstanding. Pay the bill, Marco said. Yes, of course. Bryce fumbled for his wallet. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped it once before scooping it up. He pulled out a wad of cash, $100 bills. He did not count them. He threw the entire stack onto the table. It must have been $500. Is that enough? Bryce asked, his voice high and thin. Tip the lady, Marco said. That is the tip. Keep it all. Keep it all. Bryce looked at his friends. Let us go. Now. They scrambled toward the door, tripping over themselves in their haste to get away from the quiet man in the gray coat. They did not look back. The bell chimed frantically as they shoved their way out into the rain. The diner remained silent for a long heartbeat. Then, Marco DeLuca turned around. The menace that had radiated from him a moment ago evaporated. His shoulders relaxed. He looked at Lena, and his eyes, which had been hard as flint, softened into a warm, dark brown. He looked at her wrist, where red marks from Bryce's fingers were beginning to form. Are you all right? He asked. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel shifting underwater. Lena let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. She nodded, though her knees felt weak. Yes. Thank you. You did not have to do that. Marco looked at the cash scattered on the table. He reached out and gathered it into a neat stack. He handed it to her. I think I did. He said. Lena looked at the money. It was more than she made in a week. I cannot take this, she said automatically. It is too much. Take it, Marco said firmly. Consider it an idiot tax. They can afford it. He reached into his own pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He placed it on top of the stack in her hand. And this is from me, he said. For the pie, and for having to deal with trash like that. No, Lena said, shaking her head. You already helped me. I cannot take your money too. Marco smiled. It was a small, fleeting thing, but it transformed his face. It made him look younger, less severe. It is just for you, he said, not the restaurant. Put it towards something you need. He hesitated for a moment, then reached out and lightly brushed the back of her hand with his fingers. His skin was warm, his touch startlingly gentle. He let his fingers linger for a second too long, a contact that sent a strange, confusing shiver racing up Lena's arm and settling deep in her chest. Take care of yourself, Lena, he said. He turned and walked toward the door, through the window. Lena saw a sleek black sedan pull up to the curb. A driver in a suit got out and opened the rear door before Marco even reached it. Marco slid inside, and the car pulled away, disappearing into the gray afternoon rain. Lena stood there, clutching the stack of cash, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at the red marks on her wrist, then at the empty space where Marco had stood. She knew who the DeLucas were. Everyone in Briarview knew. They were dangerous. They were violent. They were the kind of people her mother had always warned her to stay away from. But as she rubbed the spot where his fingers had grazed her skin, Lena realized with a jolt of fear that the man who had just protected her was exactly the kind of danger she had spent her whole life avoiding. And for the first time, she wasn't sure she wanted to run from it. The blue light of the phone screen was harsh against Lena's tired eyes. It was 6 a.m, the sun barely a gray suggestion against the Briarview skyline, but her phone had been buzzing incessantly since 4. She sat on the edge of her mattress, wrapped in a fraying quilt, scrolling through the notifications that had flooded the restaurant's social media page and her own personal feed. 1 star, avoid this place at all costs, the server. Lena is unstable and aggressive. Another one, and from an account named Truthseeker44, read, I saw the waitress threaten a customer just for asking for water. She is dangerous. Management needs to fire her immediately before she hurts someone. The comments were a landslide of malice. There were dozens of them, posted minutes apart, all using similar language, all clearly orchestrated. Lena felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. It was petty, it was vindictive, and it was terrifyingly effective. In the digital age, A smear campaign like this could ruin a minimum wage worker's life before breakfast. When she arrived at Harborline Grill 2 hours later, the atmosphere was poisonous. Carl, the manager, met her at the door. He did not look her in the eye. He looked at a point somewhere over her left shoulder, his forehead sheened with nervous sweat. "In my office." "Lena," Carl said, his voice tight. The office was a cramped storage closet that smelled of cleaning chemicals and old receipts. Carl sat behind his cluttered desk, wringing his hands. "Corporate called," Carl said, gesturing vaguely at his computer screen. "They saw the reviews. They saw the posts. They are asking questions. Lena, they want to know why we have a server who is allegedly abusing customers." "You know that is a lie," Lena said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You were there. Carl, you saw them. They refused to pay. They grabbed me. I saw a disturbance," Carl said, shifting in his seat. "I saw a scene involving high-profile individuals. Bryce Harrow's father is on the city council. Lena, do you understand the pressure that puts on a small franchise? Corporate is watching us closely now. One more slip, one more complaint, and my hands are tied. I cannot protect you if you are a liability." Lena stared at him, feeling the injustice burn in her throat like acid. She wanted to scream. She wanted to quit. But the image of the overdue medical bills flashed in her mind. She swallowed the scream. "I will be careful," she said quietly. "Good," Carl said, looking relieved to avoid a confrontation. "Just keep your head down. Smile. Do not give them any ammunition." The lunch rush was a blur of anxiety. Every time the door chime rang, Lena flinched, expecting to see Bryce and his entourage, but the hours dragged on without incident, bleeding into a slow, rainy afternoon. The diner emptied out, leaving only the sound of rain drumming against the plate glass windows and the hum of the refrigerator. Then, the bell chimed. Lena looked up, wiping down the counter. It was not the four men. It was Marco DeLuca. He entered with the same quiet gravity as the day before. He wore a different coat today, black wool with the collar turned up against the damp chill. He shook the rain from an umbrella and collapsed it, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. He walked straight to a booth in her section. Lena froze, the rag in her hand dripping onto the linoleum. Her heart did a strange double beat, a mix of apprehension and an involuntary spark of relief. "Coffee. Black," Marco said as she approached. "Please." He was polite, unexpectedly so. There was no arrogance in his tone, none of the entitlement she dealt with daily. He placed a folded newspaper on the table but didn't read it. He watched her as she poured the coffee, his dark eyes tracking her movements with an intensity that felt heavy, yet not predatory. "How are you holding up?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. Customers rarely asked how she was, and when they did, it was usually a prelude to a complaint. "I am fine," Lena said automatically, reciting the script. Marco took a sip of the coffee. He set the cup down without making a sound against the saucer. "You look like you did not sleep," he observed. Lena bristled slightly. "Is that a complaint about my appearance?" "No," Marco said, a faint smile touching the corner of his mouth. "It is an observation. You look like someone who is carrying the weight of the world, and the world is heavy today." His voice was low, intimate in the empty diner. It disarmed her. He asked about the rest of her shift, about how long she had worked there, questions that felt disconcertingly attentive. For a few minutes, standing there with the coffee pot in her hand, Lena forgot the reviews. She forgot the threat of corporate. She felt seen, not as a servant, but as a person. Then the door flew open. The atmosphere shattered. Laughter, loud and abrasive, filled the room. Lena turned and felt the blood drain from her face. It was them. Bryce, Trent, Oliver, and Chad. They were dressed in casual wear today, designer polo shirts and expensive jeans, but their energy was the same jagged, hostile arrogance. They stopped in the entryway, phones already out, screens glowing as they recorded. "Look who it is," Bryce announced loudly, aiming his phone camera directly at Lena. "The crazy waitress. We decided to come back and give the place a second chance. See if she is still attacking customers. They deliberately walked past Lena's section and sat in a booth on the far side of the room, serviced by a teenager named Sarah, but their voices carried. They were performing for an invisible audience. "Be careful." "Sarah," Trent shouted, "do not make eye contact. She might snap." Lena stood frozen near Marco's table, her hands trembling. Marco did not turn around. He continued to sip his coffee, but Lena saw his grip on the ceramic mug tighten until his knuckles turned white. Carl hurried out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on his trousers. He looked terrified. "Gentlemen," Carl said, his voice squeaking, "welcome back." "Everything okay? We are just concerned citizens." "Carl," Bryce said, loud enough for the camera to pick up, "we feel unsafe. That woman over there threatened us yesterday. It is a hostile environment. Why is she still employed here?" Carl looked at Lena, pleading with his eyes. He walked over to her, lowering his voice to a hiss. "Lena, go over there and apologize." "What?" Lena whispered, shocked. "Just do it," Carl said. "Tell them you are sorry for the misunderstanding. Smooth it over so they put the phones away. If this video goes online, we are done. I did nothing wrong," Lena said, her voice shaking but firm. "I will not apologize for being harassed." Carl's face reddened. "If you do not fix this, I do not know if I can keep you on the schedule next week." From across the room, Bryce laughed. "Look at her," Bryce jeered. "She's refusing to serve us. It is discrimination. Call the cops. Trent, let us file a report. We can have her escorted out. I am dialing now," Trent said, tapping his screen with theatrical slowness. "We will get her fired today," Oliver added. Lena felt tears pricking her eyes. She was cornered. If the police came, even if she was innocent, the drama would get her fired. If she apologized, she lost the last shred of her dignity. Before she could speak, a shadow moved in her peripheral vision. Marco stood up. He did not rush. He buttoned his coat with deliberate slowness. He picked up a thick, cream-colored envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. He walked across the diner floor, the sound of his dress shoes sharp against the tile. He stopped at Bryce's table. The four men looked up. Recognition dawned on their faces instantly, and the smug grins vanished, replaced by the same pallor Lena had seen yesterday. Marco did not look at the phones. He did not look at the cameras. He looked directly at Bryce. He tossed the envelope onto the table. It landed with a heavy, solid thud. "What is this?" Bryce whispered, his phone lowering slightly. $5,000, Marco said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a razor. "That covers your meal from yesterday. It covers your meal today. And it covers every meal you might want to eat for the next month." He placed his hands on the edge of the table and leaned in. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Consider it a severance package," Marco said. "You are severing your relationship with this establishment, and you are severing your interest in the lady working section too." Bryce swallowed hard, trying to summon his courage in front of his friends. "You cannot bribe us," Bryce stammered, though he eyed the envelope greedily. "You are a criminal. DeLuca, I know who you are. I could ruin you. I could have my lawyers burn down everything you own, legally." Marco's expression did not change. He did not blink. "You have lawyers," Marco said softly. "That is true. But lawyers argue the law. I am talking about facts." Marco tilted his head, his gaze boring into Bryce. "Fact 1. Marco listed, your father's re-election campaign is built on a platform of family values. It would be very unfortunate if the photos of you in the escort service in Atlantic City last month found their way to the local press." Bryce's mouth snapped shut. "Fact 2, Marco continued, shifting his gaze to Oliver. "Your venture capital firm is currently courting the Henderson account. Old man Henderson hates gambling. He would be devastated to learn about your debts in Vegas. Oliver, the ones you are leveraging company assets to cover." Oliver went gray. "And fact 3, Marco said, looking back at Bryce. "People talk. In the clubs, in the boardrooms, in the places where you think you are safe. If you continue to harass this woman, if you post one more lie online, if you even think about her name, the whispers will start. Clients will pull their money. Deals will be canceled mysteriously. Your social calendar will become very empty." Marco straightened up, towering over them. "I will not touch a hair on your heads," he promised, his voice devoid of emotion. "But I will make you radioactive. No one will do business with you. No one will take your calls. You will be rich men with nowhere to go." He tapped the envelope on the table. "Take the money. Delete the posts. Leave." The silence that followed was suffocating. Bryce looked at the envelope, then at his friends. The bravado was gone. They were just four scared boys in expensive suits who had realized they were playing a game they did not understand. Bryce grabbed the envelope. "Let us go," Bryce muttered. They slid out of the booth, heads ducked, shoving their phones into their pockets. They hurried past Lena without looking at her, pushed through the door, and practically ran into the rain. Marco watched them go, then he turned to Lena. The coldness in his face melted away as soon as he looked at her. He offered her a small, apologetic nod, then walked back to his table, left a $100 bill next to his untouched coffee, and walked out of the diner before she could say a word. The rest of the shift passed in a daze. Carl stayed in his office, too ashamed to come out. Lena worked mechanically, her mind replaying the scene over and over. The way Marco had stood there, the absolute stillness of him, the way he had destroyed them without raising a fist. When her shift finally ended, it was dark. The rain had turned into a steady downpour. Lena changed into her street clothes, wrapped her coat tight, and exited through the side door. She walked toward the bus stop, head down, just wanting to be home. Well, look who it is. The voice came from the shadows near the alleyway. Lena's heart stopped. She looked up to see the four men leaning against a silver sports car parked under a flickering street lamp. They were waiting for her. They pushed off the car and surrounded her. They did not touch her, but they crowded her space. Blocking the path to the bus stop, they smelled of alcohol now. They had clearly gone to a bar to nurse their bruised egos. "You think you are special?" Bryce sneered, stepping into her path. "Because you have a Mafia boyfriend fighting your battles?" "He is not my boyfriend," Lena said, clutching her purse strap. "Let me pass. Nobody is going to believe you," Bryce said, laughing bitterly. "A waitress and a gangster. When things go wrong, and they will, who do you think the police will believe? The councilman's son or the girl dating a criminal?" "We just want to talk," Trent said, moving to block her retreat. "We want to hear you say it. Say you are sorry." Lena's breath hitched. She looked around. The street was empty. Suddenly, the alley was flooded with blinding white light. Headlights. A black sedan roared up the street and screeched to a halt right beside them. The passenger door flew open before the car had even fully stopped. Marco stepped out. This time, there was no pretense of politeness. His expression was deadly calm, but his body was coiled like a spring. He slammed the car door shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the wet street. The effect was instantaneous. The men jumped back, stumbling over the curb in their haste to put distance between themselves and him. "We were just talking," Oliver yelped, holding his hands up. "Just talking." Marco did not speak to them. He walked straight to Lena, placing his body between her and the men. He stood there, a human wall, radiating a silent, furious warning. "Get in the car," Marco said to them, not looking back. "Or I stop being polite." Bryce let out a forced, high-pitched laugh. "We are going. We are going. You are crazy, man. We will call our lawyers." They scrambled into the silver sports car, tires spinning on the wet pavement as they sped away, taillights vanishing into the gloom. Marco turned to Lena. The fury in his eyes dimmed, replaced by concern. He scanned her face, checking for injuries. "Did they touch you?" he asked. "No," Lena whispered. She was shaking. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her knees weak. "No, they were waiting. I figured they might," Marco said grimly. "I had my driver circle the block just in case. They are cowards. Cowards always wait for the victim to be alone." He gestured to the open back door of the sedan. "Get in. I am taking you home." "I can take the bus," Lena said automatically, though the idea of standing alone at the dark bus stop terrified her. "Lena," Marco said gently, "get in the car." She looked at him. He was soaked from the rain, his hair plastered to his forehead, his expensive coat ruined. He had waited for her. He had come back. She climbed into the car. The interior was a different world. It smelled of leather and cedar. It was warm and quiet, shutting out the noise of the city. Marco slid in beside her, closing the door. "Drive," he told the driver. The car glided forward. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Lena sat with her hands clenched in her lap, staring out the window at the blurring city lights. She felt angry that she needed saving, angry that her life had become this chaotic mess. But beneath the anger was a profound sense of safety she hadn't felt in years. Marco sighed, running a hand through his wet hair. "You rolled your eyes," he said suddenly. Lena blinked, turning to look at him. "What?" "Yesterday," Marco said, a dry amusement coloring his tone. "When Bryce was screaming about his rubbery eggs, you rolled your eyes. It was quick. But I saw it. That was the moment I knew you were tough. Most people would have just cried. You looked annoyed." Lena felt a reluctant smile tug at her lips. "He was ridiculous. I was annoyed," she admitted. "He was complaining about poached eggs at a diner. Who orders poached eggs at a diner?" "Exactly." Marco chuckled. "A sociopath. That is who." The tension in the car broke. Lena let out a small laugh, and the sound surprised her. They started to talk. It wasn't the guarded conversation of a customer and a server. It was real. Marco asked about her mother, remembering details she had mentioned in passing days ago. "Is she still on the beta blockers?" he asked. "My aunt had the same condition. The side effects can be rough in the winter." "She is," Lena said, surprised. "She hates the cold. It makes her chest tight." "My mother was the same," Marco said quietly, looking out the window. "We grew up in a place with no heat. Winters were hard. I used to sleep in my coat just so I could give her my blanket." Lena looked at him, seeing the cracks in the armor. He wasn't just a suit and a reputation. He was a man who had been cold. "I thought you were born into money," Lena said. "The DeLuca name." "The name is old," Marco said. "The money is new. We had to fight for everything we have. Sometimes we fought dirty. I am not proud of all of it, but I remember where I came from. That is why I cannot stand men like Bryce. They think the world owes them something just because they exist." Lena reached forward to adjust the climate control vent, feeling a chill. At the same moment, Marco reached to do the same for her. Their hands brushed. It was a light contact, skin against skin, but it felt electric. Lena froze. The heat of his hand seemed to sear into hers. She pulled back instinctively, her breath catching. Marco did not pull back immediately. He paused, his hand hovering near the vent, his eyes shifting to hers. "Sorry," she murmured, feeling a flush climb up her neck. "Do not be," Marco said softly. He glanced at her, and for a second, the air in the car was thick with unspoken things, a spark of attraction, undeniable and dangerous, arced between them. He offered a faint, knowing smile that made her heart race, then settled back into his seat. The car pulled up to her apartment building. It was a run-down brick structure, the streetlights buzzing overhead. Marco insisted on walking her to the door. They walked up the dim stairwell to the 3rd floor. The hallway was quiet, smelling of old carpet and cooking onions. At her door, Lena fumbled for her keys. She turned to face him. He seemed too large for the narrow hallway, his presence filling the space. "Thank you," she said, clutching her keys. "For everything, for the money, for the ride. You really did not have to—" "I did," Marco said. He stepped closer. The distance between them vanished. Lena looked up at him, her back pressing against the wooden door. He was close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "You did good today." "Lena," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You stood your ground. Most people would have caved." He reached up. His hand moved slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she didn't. He gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingertips grazed her cheek. Rough skin, gentle touch. Lena's breath caught in her throat. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. She watched his gaze drop to her lips, then back up to her eyes. The air crackled. She thought, for one wild, suspended second, that he was going to kiss her. She wanted him to. Instead, Marco lowered his hand. He took her hand in his, turned it over, and brought her knuckles to his lips. It was an old-fashioned gesture, courtly and strange for a modern crime boss, but it made her knees weak. His lips were warm against her skin. "Call me if they bother you again," he murmured against her hand. He released her, stepped back, and turned to walk down the hallway. "Good night, Lena." "Good night," she whispered. She watched him disappear down the stairs, the sound of his footsteps fading. She stood there for a long time in the dim hallway, touching her cheek where his hand had been, torn between the terrifying reality of who he was and the undeniable safety she felt when she was with him. The envelope on the desk was white, crisp, and bore the corporate logo of the restaurant chain in embossed blue ink. It sat on the scarred formica surface of the manager's desk like a judge's gavel. Lena stared at it, the fluorescent hum of the office light buzzing in her ears like a trapped insect. "It has been a difficult decision," Carl said, refusing to meet her eyes. He was shuffling papers that did not need shuffling, his hands trembling slightly. "But corporate has been flooded with complaints, formal complaints. Lena, not just Yelp reviews." Lena felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her cold and numb. "Complaints about what?" she asked, her voice sounding thin and far away. "I did my job. I did everything you asked. They are saying you orchestrated the intimidation," Carl muttered, finally looking up with eyes full of guilty panic. "The lawyers for Mr. Harrow contacted headquarters. They claim you have ties to organized crime and use those ties to threaten customers on the premises. They are using words like harassment and hostile environment. That is a lie," Lena said, her voice rising. "You were there. Carl, you saw them refuse to pay. You saw Bryce grab my arm. You wanted me to apologize to them." "I have to protect the business," Carl snapped, his fear turning into defensive anger. "We cannot have the police coming here every other day. We cannot have city councilmen threatening our liquor license. Corporate gave the order this morning. You are a liability." He pushed the envelope toward her. "This is your final paycheck, plus 2 weeks of severance. Please clear out your locker." The walk from the office to the break room felt like a march to the gallows. The kitchen was busy, the clatter of pans and the hiss of the grill filling the air, but as soon as Lena stepped in, the noise seemed to drop. People looked away. Sarah, the young server Lena had covered shifts for a dozen times, suddenly found the floor tiles fascinating. The line cook, who usually joked with her about the terrible coffee, turned his back to scrub a pristine counter. They knew. The rumors had spread like black mold. Lena the trouble. Lena the mob girl. Lena the one who would bring the police down on all of them. She opened her locker with shaking hands. Her spare apron, a bottle of ibuprofen, a photo of her mother taped to the inside of the door. She peeled the photo off, the tape tearing with a sharp zip that sounded too loud in the silent room. She placed her things into a small cardboard box. No one said goodbye. No one looked up as she walked out the back door, the heavy metal slab slamming shut behind her with a finality that made her flinch. Outside, the parking lot was gray and swept by a biting wind. The damp cold cut through her thin coat. Lena walked to the edge of the pavement and stopped, gripping the cardboard box until her fingers ached. The injustice of it, the sheer crushing weight of her reality, crashed down on her. She had done nothing but work. She had swallowed her pride, taken the abuse, and tried to survive. And for that, she was standing in a parking lot with $70 to her name and a mother waiting at home for medicine they could no longer afford. She let out a scream of frustration, a raw, ragged sound that was swallowed by the wind. Tears hot with anger spilled over her cheeks. "Damn them," she sobbed, kicking a loose piece of gravel. "Damn them all." The low rumble of an engine approached, tires crunching on the wet asphalt. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, the window rolling down smoothly. Marco DeLuca stepped out. He looked impeccable, as always, in a dark suit that seemed to repel the grime of this city. He walked toward her, his expression serious, his eyes scanning her face and the box in her hands. He clearly knew. "Lena," he started, his voice low. "Do not," Lena snapped, backing away from him. She dropped the box on the hood of her rusted sedan and whirled on him, her anger finding a target. "Are you happy?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "Is this what protection looks like? I just got fired. Marco, they fired me because of you. I did not get you fired," Marco said calmly, stopping a few feet away. "They got you fired. The men who filed the complaints, you gave them the excuse," she shouted, throwing her hands up. "You walked in there and played the big scary boss, and now I am the one paying for it. I told you I just wanted to keep my head down. I told you I needed this job. Now I have nothing." Nothing, she was shaking. Not just from the cold, but from the sheer force of her panic. "You dragged me into your world," she accused, jabbing a finger toward him. "I was invisible before. Now I am a target. I did not drag you anywhere," Marco countered, his voice hardening slightly. "You were already in it. You just thought that if you let them walk all over you, they would eventually stop. They never stop." Lena. Men like Bryce Harrow consume people like you and me. If I had not stepped in, they would have gotten you fired anyway, just for the sport of it, or worse. He took a step closer, ignoring her attempt to push him back. "They were always cruel," he said, his eyes intense and dark. "I only exposed it. I made them show their hand, and that cost me my livelihood," Lena cried, the fight draining out of her as quickly as it had come, leaving her hollow. "I have bills. Marco, I have a mother who cannot breathe if she does not get her pills. I do not have the luxury of pride." She slumped against her car, burying her face in her hands. The tears came harder now, silent and defeated. Marco watched her for a long moment. The hardness in his face softened, replaced by a look of pained resolve. He reached out, not to touch her, but to rest his hand on the roof of the car near her arm, creating a barrier against the rest of the world. "I know," he said softly. "I know you are scared, and I am sorry that it came to this, but I will not let you fall." Lena looked up, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "What does that mean? Are you going to give me more charity money? I do not want it." "No charity," Marco said firmly. "A job." Lena stared at him. "I own a place downtown," he said, "a lounge called Umbra. It is upscale. It is quiet, and the tips are significantly better than what you were making here." Lena let out a bitter laugh. "A mob bar. You want me to serve drinks to your soldiers? It is a legitimate business," Marco said, his tone sharp. "I have spent the last 5 years making sure of that. I own several businesses that have nothing to do with the street. I am trying to steer things away from the old ways." He looked at her, his expression open and earnest. "I need good staff. You are good at what you do. You are fast, you are observant, and you can handle difficult people. Come work for me." Lena hesitated. Every instinct she had screamed that this was a bad idea, that getting closer to him was dangerous. But she looked at the Harbor Line Grill, the place that had just discarded her like trash, and then at Marco, who was standing in the cold offering her a lifeline. "I owe you nothing," Marco added, reading her hesitation. "If you take the job, it is because you earn it." Lena looked at the cardboard box. She took a deep breath, the cold air stinging her lungs. "I will look at it," she said warily. "That is all. I will just look." Umbra was nothing like the diner, located in the basement of a restored historic building in the Arts District. It was a world of velvet, brass, and warm, amber light. As Lena followed Marco down the wide staircase later that evening, the smell of stale grease was replaced by the scent of expensive leather, polished wood, and faint citrus. Jazz music played softly from hidden speakers, a complex, upright bass rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. The staff moved with quiet efficiency, the bartenders wore crisp vests, and the floor staff moved like dancers. What struck Lena immediately was not the luxury, but the atmosphere. When Marco walked in, the tension didn't rise, it relaxed. "Boss," a bartender called out with a genuine smile. Marco nodded. "Hey, Tony, how's the wrist?" "Better. Thanks to that specialist you recommended," Tony said, shaking a cocktail shaker. Marco guided Lena through the room. He stopped to talk to a line cook who had poked his head out, asking about his daughter's grades. He stopped by the hostess stand and signed a check for a young woman who looked to be in college. Tuition is due Friday, right? Marco asked her quietly. She looked at the check and beamed, her eyes tearing up. Thank you, Mr. DeLuca. I will pay it back, I promise. Focus on your exams, Marco said gently. We will talk about the rest later. Lena watched, bewildered. This did not fit the narrative she had built in her head. She expected fear. She expected a tyrant. Instead, she saw a man who commanded loyalty through respect. It is beautiful, she admitted as they stood near the bar. It is clean, Marco corrected. In every sense of the word. No backroom deals here. No product moving through the kitchen, just good drinks and music. He turned to her. The job is yours if you want it. Lena looked at the tuition check in the hostess's hand, then at Marco's waiting face. I will take it, she said. Training began the next night. Marco did not hand her off to a manager. He insisted on training her himself. It is different here, he explained, leading her onto the floor before opening hours at the diner. You are trying to turn tables. Here. You are curating an experience. You are not just bringing drinks. You are part of the atmosphere. He moved with her through the empty tables, showing her how to carry the heavy brass trays, how to angle her body so she was always open to the room but never in the way. Stand tall, Lena, he murmured, walking behind her. He placed his hands on her shoulders, correcting her posture. His touch was firm but professional, yet the weight of his hands sent a jolt through her. You have a habit of shrinking yourself, he said, his voice close to her ear. You try to take up as little space as possible. Stop doing that. You belong here. When you walk to a table, you own that space. He moved his hand to the small of her back to guide her through a narrow gap between two velvet armchairs. Like this, he said. The heat of his palm burned through the thin fabric of her silk blouse. It was a possessive, guiding touch that made her breath hitch. She tried to focus on his words, on the mechanics of service, but her body was hyper-aware of his proximity. She could smell him, clean soap, sandalwood, and the faint, sharp scent of starch from his shirt. Later that night, during the soft opening hours, the lounge began to fill. Lena was nervous. The clientele here wore silk and cashmere. They drank $20 cocktails and spoke in hushed tones. She was carrying a tray of martinis to a corner booth when a customer abruptly stood up, bumping her elbow. The tray tipped. 2 glasses slid off and shattered on the hardwood floor with a crash that silenced the nearby tables. Gin and olives splashed across Lena's shoes. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She flinched, her shoulders hunching up, waiting for the shout. She waited for the manager to scream, for the customer to berate her, for the humiliation she was so used to. I am sorry, she stammered, dropping to her knees to pick up the shards. I am so sorry. A pair of polished shoes stepped into her line of sight. Marco crouched down beside her. He did not look angry. He did not look annoyed. He reached out and gently took a jagged piece of glass from her trembling hand before she could cut herself. Leave it, he said softly. But I dropped it, Lena whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Marco signaled to a busboy, who was already rushing over with a broom. Everyone drops a tray sometimes, Marco said, his voice calm and reassuring. It is just glass. Lena, it is not the end of the world. He took her elbow and helped her stand. He looked at her flinching posture, his dark eyes filling with a sudden, fierce emotion that looked like pain. He looked like he wanted to pull her into his arms, to physically shield her from the memory of whoever had made her so afraid of a simple mistake. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek as he restrained himself. Go to the back and check your shoes for glass, he said gently. Take a minute. Breathe. You're doing fine. The kindness disarmed her more than any anger could have. Her eyes stung with sudden tears. She nodded and hurried to the back, her heart aching with a strange, confusing gratitude. The lounge closed at 2 a.m. The last customers drifted out into the night, and the staff began the cleanup ritual. By 3, it was just the cleaning crew, Marco and Lena. Marco was behind the bar, counting the till. Lena was folding napkins at a corner table. Come here, Marco called out softly. She walked over. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid, an expensive whiskey that caught the low light. To celebrate, he said. sliding a glass toward her. "Celebrate what?" Lena asked, sitting on a bar stool. "I broke 2 glasses. You did not quit," Marco said, raising his glass. "That is a victory." They drank in the quiet of the empty room. The whiskey was smooth, warming her chest. The exhaustion of the week began to bleed away, replaced by a comfortable haziness. Marco leaned his elbows on the bar, looking at her. "Tell me about her," he said. "Your mother." Lena looked into her glass. She is everything. She worked 3 jobs when I was a kid, so I could have new shoes for school. My father left when I was 6. He could not handle the responsibility, I guess. So it was just us, now that she is sick. It feels like it is my turn to carry her, but I am not as strong as she was. You are stronger than you think, Marco said. Most people would have broken by now. You are still standing. He took a slow sip of his drink. My brother, Dante, was the one who was supposed to run things, Marco said, his voice dropping. He was charismatic, loud. Everyone loved him, but he loved the life too much. The parties, the drugs. Marco swirled the liquid in his glass, staring at a memory. He overdosed 5 years ago. I found him. After that, I took over. I made a promise to myself that I would change the business. I cut out the dealers. I stopped the protection rackets on the small shops. I moved everything I could into places like this. He looked at Lena, his eyes intense. I am not a saint. Lena, I have done things I have to answer for. But I am trying to build something that does not destroy the people inside it. A slow jazz track began to play over the speakers, a melancholic, sultry saxophone melody. The cleaner was testing the sound system in the back office. Marco listened for a moment, then set his glass down. He stood up and walked around the bar. He stopped in front of Lena and extended his hand, executing a small, playful bow. "Humor me," he said, a crooked smile softening his face. "I never get to dance with anyone who is not trying to negotiate a deal or kill me." Lena laughed, a nervous, breathless sound. "Here? Now?" "Why not?" Marco said. "The music is free." She took his hand. His grip was warm and solid. He pulled her gently from the stool, drawing her into the center of the room where the floor was empty. He placed one hand on her waist, his fingers splaying wide, firm but careful. Lena rested her left hand on his shoulder, her right hand clasped in his. They began to move. It was a slow, easy rhythm. Lena was stiff at first, conscious of the space between them, but Marco moved with a natural grace that made it easy to follow. He guided her effortlessly, turning her in the dim light. "Relax," he murmured. She took a breath and let her body soften against the movement. Her cheek brushed his shoulder, the wool of his suit scratching softly against her skin. She could smell the whiskey on his breath, mixed with that clean, masculine cologne. She felt the steady beat of his heart through his shirt where her chest grazed his. It was a strong, rhythmic thud that seemed to sync with the bass in the music. Marco pulled her slightly closer. The world outside the lounge, the bills, the threats, the rich men, seemed to dissolve. There was only the warmth of his body and the steady rhythm beneath her feet. Lena moved her hand from his shoulder to the back of his neck, her fingers curling lightly into the short hair at the nape. She felt Marco shudder slightly at the touch, his hand at her waist tightening just a fraction. They stopped moving, though the music continued. They were standing still in the center of the room, swaying slightly. Marco looked down at her. His eyes were dark, searching. The playfulness was gone, replaced by a raw hunger that took her breath away. Lena looked up. Her gaze dropped to his mouth, then back to his eyes. The air between them was thick, charged with a magnetic pull that was terrifying and exhilarating. Marco lowered his head slowly. Lena did not pull away. She leaned in a fraction, her lips parting, her heart racing so fast she felt dizzy. She wanted this. She wanted the danger and the safety all at once. His breath ghosted against her lips. "Marco," she whispered. "Lena," he breathed back. Just as the distance between them closed to nothing, the heavy oak door of the lounge banged open. "Marco!" The voice was sharp and urgent. They sprang apart as if burned. Marco spun around, his hand instinctively going to his waistband before he recognized the intruder. It was Nico, Marco's second in command. He stood in the doorway, breathless, rain dripping from his coat. "Nico," Marco said, his voice ragged, trying to regain his composure. "This had better be important." "It is," Nico said, walking quickly toward them, his face grim. "We have a problem, a big one." "What is it?" Marco asked, the softness of the dance vanishing instantly, replaced by the cold steel of the boss. "Our guys spotted Bryce Harrow and his friends an hour ago," Nico said, glancing at Lena with an apologetic look. "They were at a warehouse down by the docks. They were meeting with Silas Vane." Marco went still. The color drained from his face. "Vane?" Marco asked sharply. "The fixer?" "The same," Nico confirmed. "And they were not just talking. Vane's people are already moving. They are setting up a narrative. Marco, they are going to frame you, and they are going to use her to do it." Nico pointed at Lena. The spell of the evening shattered completely. The warmth of the whiskey turned to ice in Lena's stomach. She looked at Marco. Seeing the realization dawn on his face, the quiet bubble they had found in the music was gone, popped by the sharp reality of the war coming for them. Marco looked at Lena, his jaw set hard. "We have to go," he said. "Now." The war began not with bullets, but with paperwork. It started on a Tuesday, 3 days after the incident at the diner. Marco DeLuca stood in the center of Ombra, his hands clasped behind his back, watching a city inspector with a clipboard pick through the immaculate wiring of the sound system. The inspector, a man named Miller who smelled of stale cigarettes and nervous sweat, was sweating because he knew exactly whose bar he was auditing, and he knew exactly why he was doing it. "I am sorry, Mr. DeLuca," Miller muttered, avoiding Marco's gaze, "but this wiring, it is not up to the new code. Subsection 4, paragraph 2, I have to write it up." Marco did not move. He simply watched. "How much?" Marco asked quietly. Miller flinched. "It is not a fine, sir. It is a cease and desist. You have to close until it is re-inspected." Marco's eyes narrowed. Closing for a week would cost him thousands, but more than that, it was a message. Nico stepped up beside Marco as the inspector scurried out the door, pasting a neon orange notice on the glass. "It is Bryce Harrow," Nico said, his voice low and grim. "We ran the connections. His father is Councilman Harrow. He sits on the zoning board. He makes the budget for the police department, and he just fast-tracked an investigation into every property you own." Marco stared at the orange sticker. "So the boy went crying to his daddy." "It gets worse," Nico continued. "We spotted Silas Vane leaving the councilman's office this morning." Marco's jaw tightened. Silas Vane was a fixer, a ghost. He was the man you called when you wanted to destroy someone's reputation without leaving fingerprints. Vane did not use guns. He used rumors, lawsuits, and the press. "They are trying to squeeze us," Marco said. "They want to make me toxic, so I have to cut a deal. They are not just coming for you, boss," Nico said softly. Marco turned to look at him. Lena received the letter that afternoon. She was sitting at her kitchen table, counting out the pills for her mother's weekly organizer. When the courier arrived, the envelope was thick, heavy, and expensive. She opened it with trembling fingers. The letterhead belonged to a law firm she recognized from billboards downtown, sharks who charged $500 an hour. The words swam before her eyes. Defamation of character, slander, malicious intent. The letter accused her of coordinating a smear campaign against Bryce Harrow and his associates. It claimed she had conspired with known criminal elements to extort money from them in the diner. It threatened a lawsuit for damages totaling $200,000 if she did not sign a formal retraction and admission of guilt within 48 hours. But the line that made her blood run cold was at the bottom. "We are also in possession of evidence linking you to organized crime syndicates, which we will be forced to turn over to the district attorney." Lena dropped the letter. It fluttered to the table, landing next to the heart medication she could barely afford. They were framing her. They were going to ruin her life, drag her name through the mud, and maybe even send her to jail, just because she had dared to ask them to pay for their burgers. She felt trapped between two terrifying worlds. On one side, the crushing, faceless power of politics and money. On the other, the dark, violent gravity of Marco DeLuca. She needed air. "I am going to the pharmacy. Mom," she called out, her voice sounding tight. Ruth, wrapped in blankets on the sofa, nodded sleepily. "Be careful, Lena. It is getting dark." The walk to the pharmacy was usually a way for Lena to clear her head. The cold evening air, the smell of damp pavement, the rhythm of her own footsteps, it usually calmed her. But tonight, the shadows stretched long and thin, looking like grasping fingers. She picked up the refill for Ruth's beta blockers. The pharmacist gave her a pitying look when she paid with a crumpled stack of small bills. But Lena barely noticed. Her mind was racing. $200,000. She didn't even have $200. She walked home, taking the shortcut through an alley that ran behind the old textile factories. It was narrower here, the streetlights broken and flickering. A car engine purred behind her. Lena stopped. The sound stopped. She started walking again. Faster. The engine revved, low and predatory. She glanced over her shoulder. A gray SUV was creeping along the curb, matching her pace. The windows were tinted dark, impenetrable. Panic spiked in her chest. She turned the corner, heading toward the main road, but the SUV accelerated, cutting across the sidewalk and blocking her path. Two men climbed out. They did not look like Bryce and his friends. These men were older, thicker, wearing cheap suits that didn't fit. They had the dead-eyed look of men who hurt people for a paycheck. "Miss Carter?" the driver asked. He had a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Who are you?" Lena asked, clutching the paper pharmacy bag to her chest. "Private investigators," the man said, flashing a badge that looked like it came from a costume shop. "We're working for the Harrow family. We just want to talk. I have nothing to say to you," Lena said, stepping back. "Leave me alone." "We just have some questions," the second man said, moving to flank her. "About your relationship with Marco DeLuca. We have a statement here for you to sign. It says he forced you to lie about Mr. Harrow." "I am not signing anything," Lena said, her voice shaking. The first man stepped closer, invading her personal space. The smell of stale tobacco and mint gum was overpowering. "You know, Lena, things could get very difficult for you," he said softly. "And for your mother, we know she is sick. Stress is very bad for a heart condition." Lena gasped. "Is that a threat?" "It is just advice," the man said. He reached out and took hold of her upper arm. His grip was loose, but heavy, a reminder of how easily he could hurt her if he wanted to. "Why don't you get in the car? We can talk where it is warm." "Let go of me," Lena cried, trying to pull away. The man tightened his grip. "Do not make a scene. Sweetheart, just get in the—" A roar cut through the air. It wasn't a car engine. It was the sound of a high-performance vehicle being pushed to its limit. Marco's black sedan drifted around the corner at the end of the alley, tires screaming against the asphalt, and surged toward them. The two men froze. The car screeched to a halt 10 feet away. The doors flew open before the wheels stopped rolling. Marco DeLuca and Nico stepped out. Marco's face was terrifying. It was not the face of the charming man who had danced with her in the lounge. It was a mask of cold, chiseled stone. His eyes were void of anything human. The man holding Lena dropped her arm as if it were on fire. "Mr. DeLuca," the man stammered, holding up his hands. "We are just doing a job. We are licensed investigators." Marco did not speak. He closed the distance in 3 long strides. The man reached inside his jacket, perhaps for a badge, perhaps for a weapon. It was a mistake. Marco moved with a speed that blurred in the dim light. He caught the man's wrist, twisting it sharply outward. There was a sickening pop, followed by a high-pitched yelp of pain. Marco didn't stop. He spun the man around, slamming him face first into the brick wall of the nearest building. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and a small metal baton clattered to the ground from his jacket pocket. Marco pinned him there, his forearm pressing against the back of the man's neck. The second man looked at Nico, who was standing casually by the car with his hand resting near his hip, looking bored. The second man made a calculation, turned, and sprinted down the alley, disappearing into the darkness. Marco leaned in close to the man pinned against the wall. "Tell Silas Vane," Marco whispered, his voice deadly calm, "that if he sends anyone near her again, I will not be polite next time. Do you understand?" Yes, the man choked out. Marco stepped back and released him. "Get out of here!" The man scrambled away, clutching his injured wrist, stumbling toward the SUV and speeding off. The silence that followed was deafening. Lena stood shivering against the cold brick. Clutching her pharmacy bag, she had just watched Marco dismantle a man in seconds. The violence had been precise, efficient, and horrifyingly practiced. She should be terrified of him. But as Marco turned toward her, the mask slipped. His eyes frantically scanned her, checking for damage. "Did he hurt you?" Marco asked, his voice rough. "No," Lena whispered. He grabbed my arm." Marco let out a breath that sounded like a curse. "You cannot stay at your apartment," he said abruptly. "What?" Lena asked, blinking. "They know where you live, Lena. They know about your mother. Vane does not play games. This was a warning. Next time. They will not just talk." He walked over to her, his presence overwhelming. "I am moving you. Tonight, I cannot just leave," Lena protested, though her resistance was weak. "My mother." "We will bring her," Marco said. "I have a secure apartment in my building. Top floor. Keycard access only. Guards in the lobby 24/7. You will be safe there." "I am not moving into your tower." "Marco," Lena cried. "I am not your possession." "Do you want them to come back?" Marco asked, his voice rising for the first time. "Do you want them to find Ruth when she is alone?" The question hung in the air, brutal and true. Lena thought of the man's hand on her arm. She thought of the threat about her mother's heart. "No," she whispered. "Then get in the car," Marco said. The next 2 hours were a blur. They picked up Ruth, Marco charming her with a story about a gas leak in their building that required a temporary relocation to a corporate suite. Ruth, groggy and trusting, went along with it. Marco's building was a fortress of glass and steel in the center of the city. The apartment he brought them to was beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture, a kitchen bigger than Lena's entire previous apartment. But to Lena, it felt like a cage. Once Ruth was settled in the guest bedroom and asleep, the silence in the living room grew thick and heavy. Marco stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. Lena stood by the kitchen island, her arms crossed, vibrating with adrenaline and resentment. "This is insane," Lena said, breaking the silence. "It is necessary," Marco replied without turning. "Is it?" Lena asked, her voice shaking. "Is it necessary that I lose my home, that I have to hide in a fortress because of you? Because of them," Marco corrected, turning to face her. "Stop saying that," Lena shouted. "You escalated this. Marco, you embarrassed them, you threatened them, and now they are hunting me to get to you. I am just a pawn in your stupid war. I did not start this war," Marco said, walking toward her. His face was hard, but his eyes were burning. "They started it the moment they decided you were less than human. They thought they owned the world. They thought they could treat you like garbage and walk away." "And maybe I would have preferred that," Lena yelled back. "Maybe I would have preferred being treated like garbage over being hunted. At least then I was safe." "You were never safe," Marco snapped, stopping just inches from her. "You were just invisible." "There is a difference. If I had not stepped in, they would have kept pushing. They would have crushed you eventually." "Lena, I did not ask you to save me," Lena screamed. She shoved him. It was a burst of pure, frustrated anger. She placed her hands on his chest and pushed with everything she had. He barely moved, but the contact snapped something in the air between them. Marco caught her wrists before she could push him again. His grip was firm, stopping her instantly. He pulled her forward, closing the small gap between them. They stood chest to chest, almost nose to nose. Lena's breathing was ragged. Marco's breath was warm against her skin, smelling faintly of peppermint and suppressed fury. "Let go," Lena breathed. Though she didn't pull away, Marco didn't let go. He looked down at her, and the anger on his face began to fracture, revealing something raw and terrified underneath. "I could not let them hurt you," he whispered, his voice rough. "Do you understand? I cannot handle the thought of them touching you." Lena stared up at him. Her heart was hammering against her ribs so hard she knew he could feel it where their bodies were pressed together. The fear in her chest began to transmute into something else, something hot and sharp. She looked at his mouth. The silence crackled, electric and unbearable. Marco loosened his grip on her wrists. He made a move to step back, to give her the space he had promised. "No," Lena said. She lifted her chin. She searched his eyes, finding the hunger he kept locked away behind the walls of his discipline. She closed the last inch and kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was messy, desperate, and fueled by the adrenaline of the fight. It tasted of fear and fury. Marco froze for a split second, and then he broke. He groaned low in his throat and kissed her back, his hands sliding from her wrists to her waist, pulling her flush against him. The impact knocked the breath out of her. His mouth was hot and demanding, moving against hers with a starving urgency. Lena's hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. She needed this. She needed to feel something other than fear. She needed to know that the fire burning between them was real. They stumbled backward. Marco's legs hit the edge of the plush sofa, and he sat down heavily, pulling Lena with him. She straddled his lap, her sweater riding up. Marco's hands were everywhere, on her waist, her back, her hips. His thumb brushed the sensitive skin beneath the hem of her shirt, sending a jolt of electricity straight to her core. He kissed down her jawline to the sensitive spot below her ear, making her gasp. For a moment, the world narrowed down to friction and heat. The scent of him, leather, rain, and musk, filled her senses. But as his hand moved higher, skimming her ribs, reality crashed back in. The violence of the alley, the letter, the trap she was in. Lena pulled back sharply, gasping for air. "Stop," she whispered. Marco froze instantly. He did not argue. He did not try to persuade her. He pulled his hands away as if he had been burned, holding them up in the air. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice ragged and breathless. I lost my head." Lena scrambled off his lap to the other end of the couch. She wrapped her arms around herself, shaking. "I am scared," she confessed, her voice trembling. Marco watched her, his chest heaving. "Of them?" "Of everything," Lena said, tears welling up. "Of them, of this, of you. I am scared of what it means to want someone like you. You are dangerous, Marco. You solve problems by breaking wrists, and I am just me." Marco's expression softened into something profoundly sad. He reached out, slowly this time, and cupped her face. His thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "I know," he murmured, "and you are right to be scared." He leaned back, putting physical distance between them, though his eyes stayed locked on hers. "I will never take more than you are willing to give, Lena," he said, his voice steady and solemn. "No matter how much I want you, and I do want you, more than I have wanted anything in a long time, but I need you to be sure." The honesty in his voice, the way he respected her boundary even when the air was still thick with desire, made Lena's chest ache. It was a different kind of danger, the danger of falling in love with a man who could break her heart just as easily as he broke a bone. "Thank you," she whispered. "Rest," Marco said, standing up. "I will take the couch in the study. You take the bedroom with Ruth. No one gets in here. Lena, you are safe tonight." He walked away, leaving her sitting in the dark living room, her lips still tingling from his kiss. 3 floors down, in the parking garage, a man stood in the shadows between 2 concrete pillars. It was Vinny, one of Marco's lieutenants. He had been passed over for a promotion last month, and he had been grumbling about Marco's softness ever since the boss had started cleaning up the business. Vinny checked his watch, then pulled a burner phone from his pocket. He dialed a number he had memorized, but never saved. "It is done," Vinny whispered into the phone. "She is in the penthouse, top floor, on the other end of the line." Silas Vane sat in a quiet office, a smile spreading across his thin face. "Good," Vane said. "And the security protocols?" Vinny looked around nervously. "I'm sending the shift schedules now. There is a 10-minute window at shift change tomorrow afternoon where the rear exit is blind." "Excellent," Vane said. "Your payment is in the usual account." Vinny hung up and deleted the call log. He looked up toward the penthouse, a flicker of guilt crossing his face, quickly replaced by resentment. "It is for the best," he muttered to himself. "The boss needs to wake up. This girl is going to get us all killed anyway." He turned and walked away, unaware that his betrayal had just set the clock ticking on a tragedy. The apartment was suffocating. It had been 2 days since Marco had moved Lena and her mother into the high-security penthouse, and the silence of the place was beginning to fray Lena's nerves. She looked out the window at the bustling street below, feeling like a bird in a glass cage. "I need to go out," she muttered to herself. Ruth was napping, the rhythmic hum of the air purifier the only sound in the room. Lena checked the fridge. They were out of milk, and Ruth's prescription needed to be picked up from the pharmacy down the street. It was a simple errand, a normal errand. She grabbed her coat. She didn't want to bother Marco's guards. She didn't want to be the helpless damsel who needed an escort to buy a gallon of milk. She needed to prove to herself that she still had agency, that she wasn't just a pawn in this dangerous game. She slipped out the service entrance during the shift change, just as she had seen the cleaning staff do. The alley was quiet. She walked briskly toward the pharmacy, the cold air feeling sharp and clean in her lungs. She felt a surge of small victory. See, she was fine. She picked up the prescription and a few groceries. On the walk back, she hummed a tune to herself, clutching the paper bag. A gray van turned the corner slowly. It was just a van. A delivery vehicle? Probably. Lena kept walking. But as it pulled up alongside her, the side door slid open with a harsh metallic rasp. Before Lena could turn her head, arms grabbed her. They were strong, rough, and smelled of gasoline. A gloved hand clamped over her mouth, stifling her scream before it could leave her throat. She dropped the grocery bag. The glass jar of pasta sauce shattered on the pavement, a splash of red that looked too much like blood. She kicked, struggling, but they dragged her into the dark interior of the van. The door slammed shut, cutting off the daylight. "Hold her still," a voice hissed. Lena saw the glint of a needle. A sharp sting pricked her neck. "No," she tried to say, but her tongue felt thick and heavy. The world began to tilt. The faces of the men blurred into gray smudges. The last thing she felt was the vibration of the engine as the van sped away, carrying her into the dark. Marco walked into the security monitoring room of his building, holding 2 coffees. "Where is Lena?" he asked, looking at the screens. The guard on duty, a young man named Eric, frowned. "She's in the apartment, boss. I haven't seen her leave." Marco felt a cold prickle of unease. Check the cameras. He dialed Lena's number. It went straight to voicemail. Eric began cycling through the feeds, the hallway, the elevator, the service entrance. "There," Eric said, pointing. The footage was grainy, but Marco saw it clearly. Lena slipping out the back door at 3:15. Panic, cold and sharp. Seized his chest. "Check the street cameras," Marco barked. "Now!" Eric typed frantically. He pulled up the external feed from the alley. Marco watched in horror as the gray van pulled up. He saw the struggle. He saw Lena being dragged inside. He saw the grocery bag hit the ground. "No!" The roar tore out of Marco's throat. He grabbed the heavy steel chair next to him and hurled it across the room. It smashed into the wall with a deafening crash, leaving a dent in the drywall. The guards froze. They had never seen Marco lose control like this. "Get the license plate!" Marco shouted, his breathing ragged. "Lock down the building. Call Nico. Get everyone we have on the street now." He braced his hands on the console, his head hanging low. The guilt hit him like a physical blow. He had promised. He had looked her in the eye and told her she was safe. And because of a 10-minute gap in his own security, because he had failed to protect her from her own need for freedom, they had her. "Find them," Marco whispered, his voice trembling with a terrifying rage. "Find them, or I burn this city down." Lena woke to the smell of damp wood and expensive cologne. Her head was pounding, a dull, rhythmic throb that matched her heartbeat. She opened her eyes. The room was dim, lit only by a few recessed lights. It was a living room, but it felt sterile, like a staged home or a rental. Beyond the large glass windows, she could see the dark, choppy water of a lake under a stormy sky. She tried to move her hands and found them bound behind her back, tied to the heavy wooden chair she was sitting in. She was not alone. Well, look who is finally awake. It was Bryce Harrow. He was standing in front of a fireplace, holding a glass of scotch. Trent, Oliver, and Chad were there too, pacing the room like nervous cats. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. She tugged at the ropes. They were tight. "Where am I?" she rasped, her throat dry. "Somewhere safe," Bryce said, smiling a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Somewhere Marco will never find you." He walked over to her. He looked different than he had in the diner. The arrogance was still there, but it was brittle now, edged with desperation. "We are going to fix this." "Lena," Bryce said, "you and I, we are going to fix the narrative." "What do you want?" Lena asked. "We want the truth," Trent said, stepping forward. "Or, at least, a version of it that people will believe." Bryce pulled a chair over and sat backward on it, facing her. "Here is the plan," he said. "We are going to record a video. In it, you are going to explain how Marco DeLuca kidnapped you, how he forced you to lie about us, how he assaulted you. He leaned in closer, and then we are going to rescue you. We will call the police, show them the video, and tell them we tracked you down to save you from a mob boss. We will be heroes. You will be the victim, and Marco goes to prison for the rest of his life." Lena stared at him. "You are insane. No one will believe that. They will believe it if you sell it," Oliver said from the corner. "You are a pretty girl. People like pretty victims. And if I refuse?" Lena asked, her voice steady despite her fear. Bryce's face hardened. He slammed his palm onto the small table beside her head. The sound was like a gunshot. Lena flinched violently. "You do not get to refuse," Bryce shouted. Chad walked over. He reached out and tilted her chin up with 2 fingers, forcing her to look at him. His touch was cold and oily. "Your mother is all alone in that apartment now," Chad said softly. "It would be a shame if her heart problems suddenly got worse. Stress can be a killer. Lena, a very unfortunate way to go." The threat hit its mark. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. They weren't just threatening her, they were threatening Ruth. She looked at their faces. They were desperate men with power and money, a dangerous combination. If she fought them now, right here, they might panic, they might hurt her, they might kill her. She needed to buy time. She needed to survive. She forced herself to take a shaky breath. She let her shoulders slump. She let the tears that were threatening to fall spill over. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. Please don't hurt my mother." Bryce sat back, looking satisfied. "See, that wasn't so hard. I can't do it looking like this," Lena said, her voice trembling. "My hair is a mess. I look like a hostage." Bryce frowned. "You are supposed to look like a hostage. Marco kidnapped you. Remember?" "Yes, but," Lena sniffled, "if I look too messy, people will focus on that. They won't listen to the words. I need to fix my face. Please." The men exchanged glances. Their vanity was their weakness. They wanted this video to be perfect. They wanted a cinematic victim, not a messy reality. "Fine," Bryce said. "Oliver, take her to the bathroom. Let her wash her face, but keep the door open." A hired guard, a man with a thick neck and a surprisingly kind face, untied her from the chair. He gripped her arm, but not painfully, and led her to a bathroom down the hall. Inside. Lena looked in the mirror. She looked pale and terrified. That part wasn't acting. She turned to the guard. "Please," she whispered, "the ropes. They are cutting off my circulation. My hands are numb. I can't feel my fingers." The guard looked at her red wrists. He hesitated. "Just a little looser," Lena begged. "Please, I'm not going anywhere. Look at me." The guard sighed. He was just doing a job. He wasn't a monster like Bryce. "Turn around," he muttered. Lena turned. He loosened the knot slightly. "Thank you." She breathed. She flexed her fingers. It wasn't much, but there was slack now. She remembered a night at Ombra, months ago. Marco had been showing her knot tricks with a bar towel, laughing as he taught her how to slip a simple bind. "It is all about leverage," he had said. His warm hands over hers, Twist and pull, create space. She prayed it would work. In the back of Marco's SUV, the air was thick with tension. Nico was driving, navigating the wet roads with white-knuckled intensity. Marco sat in the passenger seat, a tablet on his lap. "We got a ping," Nico said. One of Bryce's frat brothers made a call to a landline out by Lake Erie. The property is owned by a shell company registered to Harrow Holdings. "How far?" Marco asked. His voice was dead. 20 minutes, Nico said. "Step on it." Marco checked his weapon, a sleek, black semi-automatic. He slotted the magazine home with a sharp click. "We go in quiet." Marco told the two men in the back seat, "No guns unless absolutely necessary. If we start a shootout, Lena could get hit. We take them down, we secure her, we get out." "And the rich boys?" one of the men asked. Marco looked out the window at the passing trees. "If they are armed, put them down if they surrender. We let the law handle them." He said it, but his hand tightened on the grip of his gun. He wasn't sure he could keep that promise if he saw them touching her. The storm had arrived. Rain lashed against the windows of the lakeside house. Bryce was setting up a tripod in the living room. "Okay, Lena," he said, pointing to the couch. "Sit there. Look sad. Look scared." Lena sat. Her hands were tied again, but she had managed to keep her wrists flexed when the guard retied them, maintaining the slack. She started to cry. "It was easy. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Just say what we told you," Bryce snapped. "Start with, 'My name is Lena Carter and I was taken against my will.' Can we do a practice run?" Lena asked. "I am so nervous. I keep forgetting the words." "Jesus Christ," Trent muttered. "Just read the cue cards." "I am trying," Lena wailed. "Please, just give me a minute. What do I say about the assault? Do I say he hit me?" "Yes," Bryce yelled. "He hit you. He threatened you. Improvise." Lena was stalling. She was asking questions, making them repeat the story, looking for holes, memorizing their faces, their names, the layout of the room, and all the while she was twisting her wrists. Twist, pull, twist, pull. The rope was giving. Outside, shadows moved in the rain. Marco and his team approached the house like ghosts. They cut the power to the external floodlights. They disabled the alarm box on the side of the garage. Nico took the back door. Marco took the side entrance. They moved into the hallway. It was dark. A guard stood by the kitchen door, scrolling on his phone. Marco moved. He was a blur of motion. He wrapped an arm around the guard's throat, cutting off his air, and dragged him silently into the pantry. He zip-tied the man's hands and feet before he could make a sound. "Clear," Marco whispered into his earpiece. They moved deeper into the house. In the living room, Bryce was getting frustrated. "Action," he shouted. Lena took a breath. "My name is Lena Carter." Suddenly, a beep echoed through the house. "What was that?" Oliver asked, looking around. "The security panel," Chad said. "A camera went offline." "Someone is here," Trent whispered, his face going pale. Panic erupted. "Grab her," Bryce shouted. "Get her to the car." The guard who had loosened her ropes grabbed Lena by the arm, dragging her off the couch. "Move," he yelled. They ran toward the back hallway. Lena's legs felt numb, but her mind was sharp. She saw her chance. As they reached the narrow corridor, the guard fumbled with the back door handle. Lena stopped stalling. She dropped her weight, driving her shoulder hard into the guard's chest. He stumbled back, surprised. She twisted her wrists violently. The loosened knot gave way. Her hands came free. She didn't run. She turned and jammed her palms into the guard's face, pushing him backward over a small table. He went down with a crash. Lena scrambled toward the other end of the hall. She rounded the corner and collided with a solid wall of black wool. She screamed, raising her hands to fight. "Lena!" The voice was rough, familiar, and filled with a desperate relief. She looked up. Marco. He was there. He was real. Rainwater dripped from his hair, and his eyes were wild. "Marco!" She sobbed. He didn't speak. He pulled her against his chest, hard, his arm wrapped around her shoulders, crushing her to him. She buried her face in his wet coat, breathing in the scent of rain and him. For a heartbeat. The chaos stopped. She was safe. Then, a shout echoed from the living room. "There!" Marco shoved her gently behind him. "Stay down," he commanded. Bryce appeared at the end of the hallway. He was holding a gun. His hand was shaking so badly the barrel was vibrating. "You ruined my life!" Bryce screamed. His face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. Marco stood tall. He didn't raise his own weapon. He kept his hands visible, palms open. "Put the gun down, Bryce," Marco said. His voice was low, steady, and dangerously calm. "It is over. The police are on their way. I can hear the sirens." Bryce listened, faintly in the distance. The wail of sirens cut through the storm. "No!" Bryce yelled. "No! You did this! You!" "Bryce, look at me," Marco said, taking a slow step forward. "You pull that trigger and there is no coming back. Put it down and you walk away alive. I am not going to prison," Bryce shrieked. He squeezed the trigger. The sound of the gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Marco jerked back, his shoulder snapping as if hit by a hammer. "Marco!" Lena screamed. She rushed to him. Blood blossomed on his white shirt, dark and spreading fast. Bryce stared at the gun in his hand, horrified by what he had done. The sirens were louder now, blue lights flashing against the windows. He turned and ran. He fled through the side door, disappearing into the rain. Nico burst into the hallway. "Marco, we have to go. The cops are 2 minutes out." Marco gritted his teeth, clutching his shoulder. "I am fine. Get her to the car." Lena didn't wait. She grabbed Marco's good arm. "Move," she ordered, her voice fierce. They ran. Out the back door, through the mud, into the waiting black car. Marco slid into the back seat, groaning in pain. Lena scrambled in after him. Nico slammed the door and floored the gas. The car tore away from the house just as the first police cruiser skidded into the driveway. In the back seat, it was dark. Lena pressed a thick cloth napkin Nico had thrown her against Marco's shoulder. "Press hard." Marco grunted, his face pale. "I am," Lena said, her hands shaking. "Oh God, there is so much blood. It is just a graze." Marco lied through clenched teeth. "I have had worse." Lena looked at him. He was in pain, bleeding, risking prison, risking his life, all for her. The anger she had felt at the apartment, the fear, the resentment, it all burned away, leaving only a terrifying clarity. She leaned in. She kissed his blood-streaked knuckles, her lips trembling against his skin. "Marco," she whispered. He opened his eyes. He looked at her, really looked at her, with a vulnerability she had never seen. She leaned forward and kissed his mouth. It wasn't like the kiss in the apartment. It wasn't about lust. It was desperate, salty with tears, and edged with the metallic taste of adrenaline. It was a kiss of survival, a kiss that said, "I am here, and you are here, and nothing else matters." Marco made a sound low in his throat. He kissed her back, tenderly, despite the pain. His free hand came up to cradle the back of her neck, his thumb stroking her skin. He pulled her closer, not possessively, but as if she were the only thing anchoring him to the earth. He rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the dark car. "I thought I lost you," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You didn't," Lena said, holding his face in her hands. "You didn't." The rain drummed on the roof, a steady rhythm against the silence, as the car sped through the night, carrying them away from the nightmare and toward whatever uncertain future lay ahead. The safe house was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of the lakeside storm. It was an unassuming brick row house in a neighborhood where people kept their blinds drawn and their questions to themselves. Inside, the air smelled of rubbing alcohol and old dust. Marco sat on the edge of the narrow bed, his shirt stripped off, revealing the dark bruising already forming around the angry red gash on his shoulder. A doctor, a man Marco had called, who clearly did not work out of a hospital, was finishing the stitching. The needle moved with efficient, silent precision. Lena stood by the door, her arms wrapped around herself. She was still shivering, though the room was warm. She watched the needle pierce Marco's skin, flinching internally with every pass, but she refused to look away. She refused to leave the room. Even when Nico had suggested she go rest in the den, she needed to see him. She needed the visual confirmation that he was breathing, that the blood had stopped, that he was still here. "All done," the doctor said, snapping his gloves off. "It is a clean graze. Marco, you got lucky. Keep it dry. Change the dressing twice a day. I will leave the antibiotics on the dresser." Marco nodded, his face pale under the harsh overhead light. "Thank you, Doc." Nico escorted the doctor out, the heavy front door clicking shut with a finality that made the silence in the room even louder. The adrenaline that had fueled Lena for the last 4 hours suddenly evaporated, leaving her hollow and trembling. Her legs gave out, and she sank onto the edge of the mattress beside Marco. He turned to her, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his fresh stitches. He reached out with his good hand, his fingers warm and rough, and covered hers where they rested on her knee. "I am sorry," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "This was not how I wanted tonight to go." Lena looked at his hand, then up at his face. He looked tired. The invincible armor he wore in the world, the suits, the glare, the reputation, was stripped away. He was just a man who had taken a bullet for her. She took a shaky breath. The words she had been swallowing for weeks, the truth she had been too afraid to admit even to herself in the quiet of her own apartment, rose to her throat. "I love you," she whispered. The room seemed to stop. Marco went still. Her voice was small, but it was steady now. She turned her hand over, interlacing her fingers with his, gripping him tight. "I love you, Marco, and I was so terrified. Every time you walked through the door at the restaurant, I felt my life tilt. It scared me. It scared me because I knew you were dangerous, and I knew I should run. But it also made me feel seen. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't just part of the furniture." Marco looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face. A faint, disbelief-edged smile touched his lips, softening the hard lines of his jaw. "Lena," he murmured. He shifted, ignoring the pain in his shoulder, and turned fully toward her. "I fell for you the night you stood up to them," he confessed, his voice low and intimate, "in the diner. You were shaking. I could see it. But you stood there and you told them no. You had no backup. You had no money. You had nothing but your own dignity, and you refused to let them take it." He squeezed her hand. "I have spent my life around men who think power comes from fear," Marco said. "But watching you, that was real power. Your stubborn courage made me want to be someone worthy of it, someone worthy of you." Lena felt a tear slip down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his good shoulder. Marco brought their joined hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles, then her wrist. It was a quiet, profound affirmation. In the silence of the safe house, with the sirens still echoing in their memories, they cemented a bond that was forged in danger but held together by something far stronger. The peace did not last long. The world outside the safe house was waking up, and it was hungry for a story. By the next morning, the news cycle was spinning out of control. The incident at the lake was being reported as a gang confrontation. Early reports, fed by high-priced publicists hired by Bryce's father, painted a picture that made Lena sick to her stomach. "Local businessmen attacked by criminal syndicate." The headline on the tablet screen read, "Councilman's son targeted in extortion scheme." They were twisting it. They were using Bryce's version of events, that Marco had kidnapped Lena, and that Bryce and his friends had bravely tried to rescue her, only to be fired upon. It got worse. Photos of Lena working at Ombra leaked online. Paparazzi had dug up shots of her walking into the club, smiling at Marco. The tabloids labeled her the mob mistress. They called her a gold digger who had seduced a crime boss and was now caught in the crossfire. Lena sat in the small kitchen of the safe house, scrolling through the comments on a news article. She knew what she was getting into. Typical. Plays the victim when things go wrong. She should be in jail with him. Her heart sank, a heavy stone in her chest. She saw her name, her face. Her life dragged through the mud by people who didn't know her. Rage, hot and sharp, began to replace the fear. Then the phone rang. It was Nico. They picked up your mother, Nico said, his voice tight. Lena stood up so fast her chair clattered to the floor. What? Detectives brought Ruth in for questioning. Nico explained quickly. They are squeezing her. Lena, they are telling her that you are going to prison as an accessory to kidnapping and attempted murder unless you testify against Marco. They want you to say he forced you. They want you to corroborate Bryce's story. Marco walked into the kitchen, buttoning a fresh shirt over his bandages. He had heard. His face was a mask of cold fury. Get the car, Marco told Nico. We cannot go to the police station, Nico warned. They will arrest you on sight. I'm not leaving her mother alone in an interrogation room. Marco snarled. They compromised. Marco's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Helen, went to the station. She arranged a secure call. When Lena heard Ruth's voice on the speakerphone, she broke. Mom, are you okay? Did they hurt you? I am fine. Lena, Ruth said, though her voice was trembling. I am fine, but they are saying terrible things. They are saying you are in trouble. I am safe. Mom, I promise. Ruth took a breath, and her voice grew stronger. Lena, listen to me. The detective. He told me that if you stay silent, the rich boys walk free. He said they are already spinning a story. He said the only way to stop them is the truth. But if I tell the truth... Lena looked at Marco. Tell them, Ruth said firmly. Do not let those men destroy you. Lena, do not let them win. You tell the truth, no matter what. Lena hung up the phone. She looked at Marco. He was standing by the window, looking out at the gray street. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. I can get you out, he said softly. What? I have money put away. Cash, untraceable. I can get you and Ruth new identities. You can go west, California, maybe, or Canada. You can disappear. You can start fresh, somewhere far away from Briarview, somewhere my shadow does not touch you. He was offering to let her go. He was offering to face the charges alone, to let Bryce win the narrative, just to keep her safe. Lena felt the tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were angry tears. No, she said. Lena, it is the only way to be sure you are safe, Marco insisted, taking a step toward her. If you stay, if you testify, they will come for you, the lawyers, the press. It will be brutal. I do not care, Lena shouted. She walked up to him, grabbing the lapels of his jacket. I am done running, Marco. I am done hiding. If I run now, I am a ghost. I spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, knowing that Bryce Harrow and his friends are laughing about how they ruined me, knowing that they lied about us. She looked up into his eyes. Living as a ghost would hurt worse than standing beside you. No matter what happens, I am not leaving you. We fight this. Together. The day of the grand jury hearing, the courthouse was a circus. Reporters swarmed the steps, microphones thrusting into the air like spears. Lena walked in through the side entrance, flanked by Marco's security team and Helen. She wore a simple gray suit she had bought with the last of her savings. She held her head high, though her hands were trembling inside her pockets. The courtroom was packed. Bryce and his friends sat at the plaintiff's table, looking smug in their expensive suits, flanked by a team of high-powered attorneys. Marco sat at the defense table, looking calm and dangerous. Lena took the stand. The oath felt heavy on her tongue. She sat down, gripping the arms of the wooden chair. Miss Carter, the prosecutor began, tell us what happened on the night of November 12th. Lena took a breath. She looked at the jury. She looked at the reporters. And then she looked at Marco. He gave her a barely perceptible nod, his eyes anchoring her. She began to speak. She recounted every detail. She stripped away the shame and the fear and laid the truth bare. She talked about the double shifts at the Harbor Line Grill. She talked about the way Bryce had snapped his fingers at her like she was a dog. She described the refusal to pay, the sneering insults, the way Bryce had grabbed her wrist and told her to learn her place. She talked about the online harassment, the lies that got her fired, the men in the alley. She described the kidnapping, the van, the needle, the terror of waking up tied to a chair. The defense lawyers for Bryce attacked her viciously on cross-examination. Miss Carter, isn't it true that you are romantically involved with Mr. DeLuca? One lawyer sneered. Yes, Lena said clearly. And isn't it true that you orchestrated this entire scenario to extort money from my clients? That you and your lover planned a shakedown? No, Lena said, her voice ringing out in the quiet room. That is a lie. Your clients are not victims. They are bullies who thought their money made them untouchable. She stayed composed. She did not cry. She did not scream. She simply told the truth over and over again. But the narrative was still murky. It was her word against theirs, and they had the weight of the establishment behind them. Then came the turn. The prosecutor called a new witness, a man named Gary Solder. Lena recognized him instantly. He was the guard from the lake house, the one with the kind face, the one who had loosened her ropes. He had been arrested fleeing the scene, and, facing 20 years for kidnapping, he had decided to talk. Mr. Solder, the prosecutor asked, can you tell the court who hired you? Bryce Harrow, Solder said, his voice flat, and Silas Vane. And what were your instructions? We were told to grab the girl, to bring her to the lake house. Bryce. Mr. Harrow. He had a script. He wanted to make a video. He wanted her to say DeLuca did it. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Bryce's face went chalk white. His lawyer frantically whispered something in his ear. Did Mr. DeLuca demand any money? The prosecutor asked. No, Solder said. When DeLuca showed up, he wasn't there to negotiate. He was there to get her out. He told his men not to shoot unless they had to. He just wanted the girl safe. The carefully crafted victim narrative of the rich men shattered in that moment. You could feel it in the room. The air shifted. The reporters began typing furiously on their phones. Following Solder's testimony, the prosecution played new evidence. A grainy security video from the Harbor Line Grill recovered from a corrupted hard drive that Marco's team had managed to salvage. It showed the confrontation clearly. Bryce grabbing Lena, his face twisted in aggression. It showed Marco standing calmly, not attacking. Then, clips from the lake house security system, which Bryce had foolishly thought was disabled but had been recording to a cloud backup. It showed Lena tied to the chair. It showed Bryce screaming directions for the video. Public outrage exploded. The prosecutor, sensing the wind change, moved quickly. The charges against Lena were formally dropped. 2 days later, new warrants were issued. Lena stood on the steps of the courthouse and watched as Bryce Harrow, Trent Collins, Oliver Dane, and Chad Mercer were led out in handcuffs. They did not look smug anymore. They looked small. They looked terrified. The cameras flashed, the shutters clicking like a swarm of cicadas, capturing their downfall for the morning papers. News broke that Councilman Harrow had resigned in disgrace. His political career imploded by the revelation that he had used city resources to help cover up his son's crimes. But the fight wasn't over for Marco. He still faced potential racketeering charges. The state wanted blood. And while the kidnapping charges against him were dropped due to defense of another, his broader operations were under the microscope. In a closed-door meeting, Marco sat with the district attorney. I am done, Marco said quietly. He pushed a stack of files across the table. These are the deeds to every illegitimate property I own. These are the accounts associated with the old businesses. I am liquidating everything. The DA looked at the files. And in exchange, I pay the fines, Marco said. I accept the probation. I accept the supervision. But I stay out of prison. And I keep my legitimate businesses. The DA considered it. Putting Marco DeLuca in prison would be a trophy. But dismantling the infrastructure of the DeLuca crime family voluntarily? That was a victory. Marco agreed to cooperate on specific cases involving the Valdez cartel, the rivals who had tried to move drugs into the city. He agreed to strict conditions. It was a heavy price. It meant the end of his empire as he knew it. But as he signed the papers, Marco felt lighter than he had in 20 years. He was stepping out of the shadows. Epilogue. 6 months later, the spring sun was warm over Briarview. The neighborhood of North End had changed. It was vibrant, alive with foot traffic. On the corner of a busy street stood a restaurant with a striped awning and flower boxes in the windows. The sign above the door read, "Lena's Table, Inside." The air smelled of garlic, roasted tomatoes, and fresh bread. It was bustling. Every table was full. Lena moved through the dining room with a natural, easy grace. She wasn't wearing a uniform anymore. She wore a soft blue dress that moved with her. She greeted regulars by name, laughing at a joke from Mr. Henderson, who had followed her here from the old diner. Ruth sat at a corner table, looking healthier than she had in years. Her color was back, her laugh loud as she gossiped with two other older women over tea and biscotti. The kitchen was humming, and at the center of it, not cooking but directing the flow like a conductor, was Marco. He wore a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up, revealing the faint scar on his forearm. He looked at ease. He looked happy. In the middle of the service, the bell above the door chimed. A group of 4 young men walked in. They were loud, wearing college sweatshirts, carrying the boisterous energy of youth and entitlement. They sat at a table near the window. A teenage server, a girl named Maya who was new and nervous, went to take their order. One of the boys made a crack about the prices. Another made a joke about not tipping if the water wasn't cold enough. They were just boys, posturing. But Maya looked terrified. Lena saw it. Her spine stiffened. She started toward the table, ready to intervene, ready to protect her staff the way she wished someone had protected her. But before she reached the table, she felt a familiar warmth at her back. A hand rested lightly at the small of her back. Marco was there. He didn't look like a mob lord anymore. There was no menace in him, only a quiet, undeniable authority. He stepped up beside Lena. "Gentlemen," Marco said. His voice was calm, unblinking. The boys looked up. They saw a man who held himself with a stillness that commanded respect. They saw the way he looked at them, not with anger, but with an expectation of decency. "Welcome to my restaurant," Marco said. "We treat people with respect here. If that is a problem, there is a burger joint down the street." The boys went quiet. The leader of the group swallowed, his bravado evaporating. "No problem, sir," the boy said. "We are cool." "Good," Marco said. "Enjoy the food." He stepped back. The boys were polite for the rest of the meal. They paid the bill. They left a 20% tip. As the door closed behind them, Lena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. A laugh bubbled up in her chest, a sound of pure relief and gratitude. She turned to Marco. He was watching her, that faint, knowing smile playing on his lips. She slipped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his chest right in the middle of the dining room. She could feel his heart beating steadily against her cheek. Marco folded her into his embrace, unconcerned with the customers watching. He rested his chin on the top of her head. For a moment, the restaurant faded away. The noise of the cutlery, the jazz music, the chatter, it all blurred into the background. The world narrowed down to the warmth of his body against hers. She felt his thumb drawing lazy circles at the base of her spine, a grounding, possessive touch. Her fingers idly straightened the collar of his shirt. Marco tilted her chin up. He kissed her. It was slow, deep, and unhurried. It was a kiss full of memory, of rain-slicked alleys, of a sterile safe house, of a courtroom, of the fear that had almost consumed them. But mostly, it was full of the life they were building now, a life chosen, not forced. Customers smiled and looked away politely. They broke apart, foreheads touching. "You know," Marco murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. "As long as we stand together, men like Bryce never get the last word." Lena smiled, closing her eyes. "No," she whispered. "They don't." She opened her eyes and looked at the man she loved, standing in the soft golden light of their own hard-won peace. Thank you so much for listening to 4 Rich Men Refuse to Pay the Waitress Until the Mafia Boss Shows Up Behind Them. I hope you enjoyed Lena and Marco's journey from the diner to their happy ending. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below letting me know where in the world you are listening from. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories for more emotional and exciting tales. Don't forget to share your thoughts on the ending in the comments. Thank you for your support.